Hello, my name is Christine and I run a vintage shop called Prima Treasures on Etsy. Today I wanted to bring you this lamp. It's called the Sightlight and it was patented. This design was patented around the 1930s. I believe it was sold through the 1950s. But you can see that this lamp has a pretty unusual design, and it's in the class of lamps that collectors generally refer to as flying saucer lamp. And as such, they are highly collectible. So the reason I wanted to feature this lamp is not just because it looks so unusual, but also because it turned into quite the rehab project for us. And I went on YouTube and online searching Google and whatnot, and I didn't see anyone else talking about how one might go about rewiring a lamp like this. And as a result, I decided to document our process. So that way people in the future who might be concerned or have questions about how to do the rewiring, they would have, our videos that we shot to look at and help them formulate a plan. So basically what you have here is a lamp that it has the cord coming out of the base here, but the tricky part, and you can see from the design that it's got this skinny little arm that comes up, and then up in here is the socket. So the reason that's tricky is because the channel that the wire goes through is not much bigger than the wire itself. And so whenever you have a situation like that where you have kind of a confined space to work with in terms of getting wire into a lamp, it becomes challenging. So I wanted to just briefly run through this part of the repair because this was one of the issues where we got stuck trying to figure out how best to deal with the lamp, specifically the disassembly, because it's pretty obvious you've got this long arm here that the cord was running through, but I had kind of hoped, and let me show how this works, that this piece here rests on top of this. It did. And I had kind of hoped that maybe we could just disassemble at this point, pull some of the cord through the base, because we clipped it already, but it threaded up through here at the bottom. I had hoped that if we could pull a little bit of it this direction, it would loosen the socket at this end, allowing us to pull that up a little bit, disconnect it, put a new one on, and then pull it back through. Unfortunately, this end was where the cord was bare and fraying, and so that didn't work out quite so well as we had hoped. And the other problem with that plan was that this piece right here, I hope you can see, it's got a lot of corrosion and gunk on it, as did this, and we couldn't get it to move. So I guess the rust, corrosion, whatever was going on there, had pretty much adhered those two pieces together. And that was a real sticking point for us because as we were trying to manipulate it, because it's not moving, we're thinking, are we crazy that we think we see a break right there? And so part of the reason I wanted to run through this is to just show anybody else who's having that question. Yes, it is two pieces. This is threaded in there. They do come apart. Obviously this one desperately needs to be cleaned or something, and we ended up having to soak it with a rust solution to loosen it up and get it to let go. So we did end up cutting the cord at this end, which I had been hoping to avoid, but if your cord wasn't frayed and your socket base right here were more freely moving, you could potentially get away with just, pulling the cord a bit this direction, taking the socket, the lamp socket off, replacing it, and then pulling the thread or pulling the cord back this direction to get it resecured. That didn't work out for us, obviously, because we had to completely take it apart, but that probably would be an option. So anyway, The other tricky thing that I didn't mention is that we went to two hardware stores actually, and most of the modern sockets that we found to replace this piece were a bit too wide to fit through this. It's basically like a decorative holder. You put the new socket or whatever socket down in here, and it covers the hardware itself. And it has a channel here to let the knob, whether it's a push knob or this one actually had a turn knob. This turns like this, but you could also use a push-through knob because it's got the opening on both sides. Anyway, it's basically a decorative cover. But a lot of the ones that we found did not want to slide in here. So I think what we're going to end up going with, we purchased two to try. We're going to end up going with one that was bare except for the cardboard sleeve and bare on the bottom. So basically it didn't have the bottom cover with the threaded piece sticking out the bottom. It's just open. So you probably want to take this piece with you if you have to go shopping, and look for basically the smallest one you can find, which we found at Lowe's. They had actually, strangely, a bigger selection of different sizes and types of sockets than Home Depot did. Okay, so I wanted to just real quickly go over this part of the lamp project because this was actually the first thing on my hit list when I picked it up. I noticed right away that these little decorative knobs that were on top of it, and you can see there's 3 holes where they fit in just to be a little accent. But when I got it, this particular lid just had 2. So something that comes up fairly regularly with rehab work of any kind is when you have missing fasteners, knobs, what have you. You can see this one is fairly small, but it's just like a little ball, and it's got a little bit of a screw on the end to go down into the, this is actually a lampshade here. So when you have something that's missing, you have to find a replacement part, and that can be a difficult process depending on, you know, stuff that was made. I'm guessing this one is probably 50s era, maybe 40s, could be as early as the 40s. It can be hard to find replacement parts because, you know, a lot of what we do today is standardized, but back then it was more the Wild West, where people kind of made things for their own uses and didn't really care if it was a standard size for any other company that was doing similar items. So, you know, I was lucky. I was able to find some little decorative balls here. They did not have their own screw built in, so you can see on this side they did have a threaded hole on the other side. So I was able to get some little brass screws that were quite short that could go into the decorative ball. And then they were brass when I bought them, which I did not think would look particularly attractive with this lamp. So I went ahead and used craft paint, and I painted each one black so that they would, you know, accent more nicely with the lampshade itself. And I put a little bit of sealant on top just so if someone were needing to unscrew them, the paint wouldn't, because craft paint is not super durable, so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to just flake off the second you touched it. But you can see this lampshade, let me put it right there, it has a little bit of a flying saucer shape. There's an indent in the middle here, and it does have some dings and dents, and let me get those, see, you can see right there, there's some dings in the lid. And that's the kind of thing that if somebody were to completely refurbish it, they would probably want to hammer that out. But, and then you also have the finish, which, you know, has some scuffs and scrapes and a little bit of, there's some flaking near each of the knobs here. But some people who buy vintage are not a real fan of having their piece completely rehabbed and looking brand new, because they're seeking out vintage to get that weathered, rustic look in the first place. So when you completely refinish it and make it look like a brand new item off the shelf, you kind of take away the character that certain buyers are looking for. So generally my feeling is that unless something is just thoroughly ugly in nature, then I'm going to try to leave it alone and let the buyer decide whether to refinish it or not. So in this particular case, it still looks decent. It has an interesting kind of crackle finish on it. It's got some age and wear to it, but not what I would consider excessive, where you have half the paint flaking off or the lid is so bent it's actually misshapen and doesn't even, look the right shape anymore. So I feel this is a scenario where when the buyer gets it, if they want to refinish it, great. Then they can pick a color that actually goes with their decor, as opposed to me doing it, which, would put me in the position of either picking a really bland color so it goes with everybody's decor, or picking a color that clashes with somebody's decor, and then they're going to decide not to buy the lamp because of the color. So I'd rather not be in that position of making that kind of decision. And so that's why, another reason why it's better to kind of let the buyer decide if that's a road they want to go down. Anyway, you can see here that I took the two missing decorative knobs, or I took the one decorative knob that was missing, and I used the existing ones that were on it to kind of give me a sense of what to replace it with. We did replace it. I went ahead and repainted those. Somebody could actually take the paint off if they wanted to. It's just craft paint. But it wouldn't be that hard to redo those if you wanted to too. But right now they're just kind of a neutral black to go with the gray. And so from that standpoint, now the lampshade is in a more workable condition because we replaced the knobs, the little decorative knobs, with something that we have 3 that are matching as opposed to 2 that match and then 1 that's just completely missing. Because for the most part, I find buyers are not real thrilled when you have like utterly missing pieces of a lamp. And they're much more accepting of replacement pieces that maybe aren't original to the piece, but they at least give it that sense of cohesion and completeness. So anyway, this is what we did with the lid so far, and once we get the wiring redone, we're going to put this lid back on the lamp, and then you can see the finished piece. And I can confirm that when we put this wire in, it basically got stuck right here in this little ball section, because it ran into the end here, and it didn't, this cord is fairly stiff. It didn't want to bend upward and come up this way. And so we basically had to get down in there with a tool and sort of pry the wire up around this bend and then into the upward direction to head towards the socket. So, and that was exactly what I was hoping to avoid with rewiring this. My initial thought was not to rewire it, but to leave the original wire in and just replace the socket by pulling some excess cord through the channel to give me room to work with, to get the socket out and replace it, and then pull the cord back through the base to reseat it. And that didn't work because the cord was really old and it had some bare wire down here at the base. And I should turn this so you can see a little bit, I hope. Yeah. You can see here that there's just a hole, and it did have a little like rubber gasket right there that we had to remove because it was pretty well stuck on the old cord. We couldn't reuse it. But you can see here that it's metal right here, and over time, it's going to kind of wiggle, and in the case of the previous one, it had frayed right there. So that is kind of a tricky point, and as I said, they had put a rubber gasket on it, but it hadn't saved this particular lamp. Anyway, so the cool thing about this lamp is that it's made as a desk lamp, and the shade, part of the reason they patented is because the shade reflects the light downward toward your table. So when you turn the light bulb on, it's got kind of reflector assembly. Well, the underside of this acts as a reflector and pushes the light down towards the table, but it doesn't reflect light in your eyes when you're above it. So apparently they thought that was novel. I don't know. But the thing that I think is interesting about it is that you've got this cool pivoting arm, so you can pretty much put it wherever you want it. And, you know, obviously the design itself has this flying saucer look to it. So anyway, this is the finished assembled lamp, and I wanted to show basically how it works. And then the one other thing I wanted to note is that in a previous clip, we had different fasteners on top of here, and we ended up going a different direction and found a second type of fastener because this top bolts onto a frame underneath, and our original bolts that we had were not quite long enough. So we ended up going with a different type purely for that reason, because we needed the bolts to be a little bit longer so they could go down through the frame and then, you know, connect on the other side.